What if the exhaustion you feel, the confusion, the pressure to conform, the fear of standing alone, is not a personal failure, but a design? This video solves one core problem. Why, the moment you begin to think clearly, society subtly turns against you, and how this pressure keeps most people asleep without chains, without force, without ever realizing it. A stable society does not arise from truth but from agreement. What holds people together is not clarity but consensus, not understanding but repetition. From the outside, social order appears noble, necessary, even protective. But beneath this appearance lies a fragile psychological contract. Most people must accept the world as it is presented to them, not as it actually operates. Awareness disrupts this contract, and that is why it is treated as a silent danger rather than a virtue. An aware individual does not move in rhythm with the crowd. While others act from habit, expectation, and inherited belief, the awakened mind pauses. It asks why certain values are praised, why certain sacrifices are demanded, why certain lives are celebrated while others are dismissed as failures. These questions do not merely irritate society, they destabilize it. Order depends on predictability, and awareness makes a person unpredictable. Every social structure requires roles. These roles are not assigned through force but through stories. Stories about success, morality, happiness, and purpose. People follow these narratives because they promise belonging and protection from chaos. But the moment someone sees these stories as psychological tools rather than eternal truths, they stop playing their part convincingly. They no longer chase what everyone else chases, fear what everyone else fears, or admire what everyone else admires. This quiet refusal creates anxiety in others because it exposes a possibility they are not ready to face. Society reacts defensively to this kind of awareness, not because it is malicious, but because it is fragile. Most people do not consciously choose illusion, they inherit it. Their sense of identity, worth, and direction is built upon beliefs they have never examined. When an aware individual challenges these beliefs, not aggressively, but simply by living differently, it threatens the emotional foundation of those around them. It forces an uncomfortable comparison between borrowed meaning and self-derived understanding. This is why awareness is often reframed as negativity. The person who sees clearly is accused of being cynical, ungrateful, or arrogant. Their insight is not debated, it is dismissed. Society prefers to label the awakened mind as broken rather than question the system that produced their clarity. In doing so, it protects a majority from doubt, and doubt is far more dangerous than ignorance. Ignorance keeps people functional, doubt makes them pause. From childhood, individuals are trained to associate acceptance with safety. Approval becomes a psychological currency, and rejection becomes a threat. Awareness puts this currency at risk. The more clearly a person sees social games, status rituals, and moral performances, the less motivated they are to participate in them. This withdrawal is interpreted as rebellion, even when it is quiet and internal. A person who no longer seeks validation cannot be easily controlled, predicted, or motivated by standard rewards. Social stability depends on emotional synchronization. People must feel roughly the same desires, the same fears, and the same hopes at the same time. Awareness breaks this synchronization. An awakened individual may feel detached where others feel excited, calm where others panic, indifferent where others compete. This emotional asymmetry is unsettling. It reminds the collective that their reactions are not inevitable, but conditioned. The danger of awareness is not that it creates chaos immediately, but that it introduces the idea that chaos is already present beneath the surface. It reveals that many social rules exist not because they are just, but because they are convenient. It exposes how much suffering is normalized, how many lives are quietly spent maintaining appearances rather than seeking truth. Once this is seen, it cannot be unseen. Society does not need everyone asleep, but it needs enough people asleep to function without resistance. A small number of aware individuals can be tolerated as long as they remain isolated or silent. Problems arise when awareness spreads, when people begin to realize that many of their struggles are not personal failures but predictable outcomes of a system that benefits from their confusion. At that point, stability becomes tension, and tension invites change. This is why society subtly discourages deep reflection, not through censorship, but through exhaustion, not through prohibition, but through distraction. An overworked, overstimulated mind has no energy left for awareness. And when awareness does emerge, it is framed as impractical, dangerous, or selfish. The message is clear without being spoken. Understanding too much will cost you comfort, belonging, and peace. An aware individual stands at the edge of social reality, seeing both the structure and the cracks within it. They recognize that order is maintained not by truth, but by shared avoidance. And in that recognition lies the real threat, not to society's survival, but to its illusions, which are often treated as more sacred than reality itself. Control rarely announces itself as control. If it did, resistance would be immediate. Instead, it arrived disguised as comfort, convenience, and care. People imagine domination as something harsh and visible, enforced through fear or violence, but modern psychological control works in the opposite direction. It soothes rather than threatens. It offers relief instead of restriction. And precisely because of this, it is accepted without suspicion. Comfort weakens the instinct to question. When basic desires are met, when pain is postponed and dissatisfaction is numbed, the mind loses its urgency. A person who is comfortable does not ask whether their life is meaningful, only whether it is pleasant. This shift is subtle but decisive. Meaning demands confrontation with uncomfortable truths, while pleasure demands only continuation. Society understands this difference instinctively and builds its systems around it. From an early age, individuals are taught to associate obedience with reward. Work hard, follow the rules, and comfort will follow. Discomfort is framed as failure rather than as a signal for reflection. Over time, this conditioning creates a psychological dependency. People learn to measure their worth not by clarity or integrity, but by how well they can maintain a certain level of comfort. The fear of losing it becomes stronger than the desire to understand the world beyond it. Distraction plays a central role in this process. A distracted mind is a pacified mind. Endless entertainment, constant noise, and artificial urgency fill every empty space where thought might otherwise arise. Silence becomes uncomfortable because it invites awareness, and awareness threatens the fragile balance comfort creates. Society does not need to forbid deep thinking. It simply needs to make it unnecessary, inconvenient, and exhausting. Comfort also reshapes values. Qualities like patience, obedience, and adaptability are praised because they preserve stability. Meanwhile, traits like solitude, skepticism, and introspection are quietly discouraged. They do not produce immediate economic or social benefits. And worse, they often lead individuals to question whether the rewards offered are worth the cost demanded. A person who is comfortable but aware becomes dangerous, so comfort is carefully calibrated to keep awareness shallow. The promise of comfort is always conditional. It must be maintained through compliance, productivity, and silence. This creates an internalized form of control, where people regulate themselves to avoid discomfort. They choose safer opinions, familiar paths, and acceptable desires. Over time, this self-regulation feels like free choice, even though the range of choices has been carefully narrowed. The illusion of freedom is preserved, while actual independence fades. Psychological comfort also dulls the perception of suffering. When life feels manageable, people assume it must be just. Structural inequality, emotional emptiness, and quiet despair are rationalized as personal issues rather than systemic patterns. Comfort makes injustice tolerable by making it distant. As long as one's own life remains relatively stable, deeper problems can be ignored without guilt. This is why awakening often feels like discomfort rather than liberation. To see clearly is to feel the weight of what was previously numbed. The comforts that once felt reassuring begin to feel hollow, even oppressive. Many retreat at this stage, not because they are incapable of understanding, but because understanding threatens to take away what little peace they have been promised. Comfort becomes a bargain. Surrender awareness, and in return, you will be spared from existential unrest. Society reinforces this bargain through normalization. The restless are told to relax. The dissatisfied are told to be grateful. The questioning are told they are overthinking. In each case, the underlying message is the same: return to comfort and stop disturbing the emotional equilibrium of the group. This pressure is rarely explicit, but it is persistent enough to shape behavior over time. True control succeeds when people defend the very comforts that limit them. They protect routines that exhaust them, distractions that numb them, and rewards that never fully satisfy. Any threat to these comforts is perceived as a threat to stability itself. Awareness, by contrast, offers no immediate relief. It demands patience, solitude, and a willingness to sit with unease. And because it refuses to provide instant comfort, it is treated as impractical, even dangerous. In the end, comfort is not the absence of chains, but the softening of them until they are no longer felt. It keeps people moving within invisible boundaries, convinced they are choosing freely. And as long as comfort remains the highest value, control will never need to announce itself, because it will already be welcome. Society rarely confronts awareness directly. Open hostility would expose its fear too clearly. Instead, it relies on subtle psychological mechanisms that pressure the awakened individual back into alignment. This punishment is not organized, nor is it consciously agreed upon, yet it emerges with remarkable consistency. The collective senses deviation instinctively, and what it cannot absorb, it attempts to correct or expel. The first response to clarity is misunderstanding. An individual who sees beyond social illusion speaks a different internal language. Their priorities shift, their motivations change, and their emotional reactions no longer mirror those of the group. This difference creates friction. Others struggle to relate, not because the awakened person is obscure, but because their clarity highlights what others avoid seeing. Rather than confront this discomfort, the collective reframes the individual as strange, difficult, or disconnected. Isolation soon follows. Invitations grow fewer. Conversations become shallow. The person who once belonged begins to feel subtly sidelined. This is not always intentional cruelty. Often it is emotional self-preservation. People are drawn to those who reinforce their worldview, not those who quietly dismantle it. Awareness acts like a mirror, reflecting back contradictions people would rather keep hidden. Distance becomes the easier solution. Language is one of the collective's most effective tools of punishment. Labels are assigned not to understand, but to reduce. The awakened individual is called pessimistic, cold, arrogant, or ungrateful. These labels serve a dual purpose. They invalidate the person's perspective while reassuring the group that nothing is wrong with the system itself. If the individual is flawed, then their insight can be ignored without guilt. What makes this punishment especially effective is that it attacks belonging rather than safety. Humans can endure hardship, but exclusion cuts deeper. The loss of shared laughter, mutual recognition, and emotional resonance creates a quiet suffering that few are prepared for. Many retreat at this stage, not because their awareness fades, but because the cost of standing alone becomes unbearable. Silence becomes a survival strategy. The collective also punishes awareness through moral inversion. The one who questions accepted norms is accused of causing division. The one who refuses empty optimism is blamed for negativity. The one who seeks truth over comfort is framed as selfish. In this way, insight is transformed into a moral failing. The awakened person is made to feel responsible for the discomfort that clarity causes in others. Over time, this pressure can create internal conflict. The aware individual begins to doubt not what they see, but whether seeing is worth the cost. They may attempt to soften their words, hide their thoughts, or perform normalcy to regain acceptance. This self-censorship is one of the collective's quiet victories. No force is applied, yet conformity is restored. It is important to understand that the collective does not hate awareness. It fears disruption. Social cohesion depends on shared assumptions, and those assumptions are emotionally protected. When someone sees too clearly, they expose a fragile scaffolding beneath everyday life. The punishment that follows is an attempt to preserve emotional order, not to seek truth. The cruelty lies in the denial. Society denies that punishment is taking place at all. The isolated individual is told they are imagining things, that relationships change naturally, that life is simply busy. This gaslighting deepens a wound. Without acknowledgement, the suffering feels personal rather than structural. The awakened person may believe they are uniquely incompatible with others, rather than recognizing a pattern that is repeated throughout history. Yet this punishment is also revealing. It shows that awareness carries weight. If clarity were harmless, it would be ignored. The fact that it provokes resistance, discomfort, and exclusion proves its power. The collective instinctively understands that if too many people see clearly, the emotional glue holding society together begins to weaken. Those who endure this phase often emerge quieter, not because they have surrendered, but because they have learned discernment. They realize that insight is not meant for every ear, and that truth spoken without readiness often returns as hostility. Awareness matures into restraint. The punishment never fully disappears, but it loses its power to confuse. In the end, the collective does not crush awareness outright. It tests it. It applies pressure through misunderstanding, isolation, and moral accusation, filtering out those who cannot bear the weight of clarity. What remains are individuals who no longer seek validation from the crowd, who understand that belonging purchased at the cost of truth is a fragile refuge, and who carry their insight not as a weapon, but as a solitary flame in a world that prefers the comfort of shared darkness. The most effective form of control is the one that never feels imposed. When people believe they are acting out of free will, resistance dissolves before it can even form. Psychological slavery does not demand obedience, it invites participation. It does not threaten punishment, it offers options. And in doing so, it creates a condition where individuals defend the very structures that limit them. Choice, when carefully framed, becomes a tool of containment. People are allowed to choose between paths that all lead in the same direction. They may select different lifestyles, identities, or ambitions, yet remain bound to the same underlying assumptions about success, happiness, and worth. This illusion of variety creates satisfaction without freedom. As long as choice exists within predetermined boundaries, control remains invisible. From early life, individuals are taught that freedom means selection, not authorship. You are free to choose what to consume, what to pursue, and how to present yourself, but rarely encouraged to question why these options exist in the first place. The deeper questions are quietly discouraged, not through prohibition, but through irrelevance. They are labeled impractical, unrealistic, or disconnected from real life. In this way, the range of thought is narrowed long before the individual becomes aware of it. Psychological slavery thrives on internalization. External authority gradually withdraws, replaced by self-surveillance. People begin to monitor their own desires, censor their own doubts, and regulate their own ambitions. They measure themselves against social benchmarks and feel guilt when they fall short, even though these benchmarks were never chosen consciously. Control succeeds when the individual becomes both prisoner and guard. The language of empowerment often conceals this dynamic. Words like freedom, authenticity, and self-expression are celebrated, yet they are defined in ways that remain compatible with existing systems. Expression is encouraged as long as it is harmless. Authenticity is praised as long as it is marketable. Freedom is tolerated as long as it does not challenge structural norms. The moment choice threatens stability, it is reframed as irresponsibility. This form of slavery is especially resilient because it satisfies the ego. People feel important, unique, and self-directed. They identify with their roles, defend their decisions, and take pride in navigating the system successfully. To question the system would be to question themselves. This psychological attachment creates loyalty far stronger than fear ever could. Awareness disrupts this attachment. When a person realizes that many of their choices were shaped rather than chosen, a quiet unease emerges. They begin to see how preferences were cultivated, how ambitions were suggested, and how fears were implanted. This realization is deeply uncomfortable because it undermines the narrative of autonomy that modern identity depends upon. Society responds to this awareness by doubling down on the rhetoric of choice. The individual is told that dissatisfaction is a personal failure, not a structural consequence. If freedom exists, then unhappiness must be the individual's fault. This logic keeps the system intact by redirecting blame inward. People exhaust themselves trying to optimize their lives within boundaries they never set. Psychological slavery also benefits from comparison. When everyone is choosing within the same narrow framework, competition replaces cooperation. Individuals become focused on outperforming one another rather than questioning the rules of the game. This fragmentation prevents collective awareness from forming. Each person is too busy managing their own path to notice that all paths lead to the same constraints. The final layer of control is emotional investment. People grow attached to the identities they have built through their choices. These identities provide meaning, status, and a sense of self. Letting go of them feels like erasure. Even when awareness dawns, many retreat rather than face the loss of self that true freedom demands. Psychological slavery persists not because people are ignorant, but because awakening threatens to dissolve who they believe themselves to be. True freedom begins where conditioned choice ends. It requires a courage to sit with uncertainty, to exist without borrowed definitions, and to accept that clarity may strip away more than it gives. This is why psychological slavery remains effective. It offers comfort, identity, and direction, while awareness offers only responsibility. And as long as choice feels sufficient, few will risk discovering whether they were ever truly free at all.